Hi there. Welcome to the first edition of Freethink Friday. Every Friday, I will invite you to think freely on one big question swirling around in my head. These questions will range from the deeply existential to the absurdly pointless. Here's today's question. What does your profession have in common with psychotherapy? Yes. Are there any similarities between you in your line of work and the work that therapists do? I'll start. I have been a journalist for most of my career, though I don't consider myself an active journalist any longer. I have, in hindsight now, been able to record quite a few similarities that connect therapists and journalists. Here you go. Number one, both therapy and journalism are expose professionals to a lot of vicarious secondhand trauma. We are supposed to listen to other people's stories of pain and suffering, make meaning of it, create narratives out of it. It affects us deeply at a very emotional level, and often journalists as well as therapists struggle with these emotions. Therapists have, or at least on paper in theory, all of them have support. There are supervisors, they have their own therapists to try and sublimate a lot of that secondhand trauma. Journalists, not so much. The vast majority of journalism professionals are still completely on their own. When they experience traumatic stories, they are usually they have to deal with the emotional toll of it on their own. Very, very few organizations actually provide a caring, nurturing, empathetic environment for journalists to heal from that secondhand trauma. So that's the number one similarity. Similarity number two, both these professional journalists as well as therapists are struggling with terrible work cultures in their employer organizations. You will find a lot of therapists now taking to social media, LinkedIn, etc., and talking about this sort of very callous, exploitative, oppressive practices that their employers have been forcing them to accept. And journalism is, of course, it is notorious. It is notorious as a hotbed for very problematic employment practices and work culture, causing a lot of burnout, causing a lot of journalists to get disillusioned and leave the profession altogether. So, vile employers and terrible work cultures is another thing that bonds journalists and therapists. What do we have next? I think both these professions make it very difficult for the workers to go out there and strike it out on their own as solo operators. So if you're fed up of your organization or your employer and you want to go out there and start a practice of your own as a therapist, or as a journalist you want to start an independent practice, it's very, very difficult. The tools to do that, access to the market, the infrastructure, all of that is very difficult to get if you don't have a lot of connections, or if you don't come already from a lot of money. It's very, very difficult for relatively inexperienced journalists and therapists to strike out on their own and build a decent, respectable livelihood quickly. So that's another thing that connects these two professions. Another connection, a very obvious connection, is that there's a very high ethical barrier that these two professions are supposed to honor very high ethical norms, and usually if these professionals fail to live up to those norms, the costs to society can be quite scary, and the implications can be very, very far reaching. If a journalist does not do their job with integrity and honesty, as indeed a therapist, the implications, the outcome could be horrifying for both the general public that consume journalism, as well as patients, and indeed the entire user survivor ecosystem in mental health who look to therapists for care and healing. So that's another common factor between these two professions. What else do we have? I think both these professions right now are dealing with a lot of tech phobia. There is a lot of surround sound that AI and chatbots, etc., will wipe out human therapists, which is ridiculous. I hate that narrative, but it's there and it's growing. There are hundreds of apps are being launched every month. Many of them come heavily funded by venture capitalists, and the noise that AI will one day make human therapists redundant is a stubborn one. It refuses to go away. In journalism as well, the sort of deep job cuts and mass layoffs that have been happening in the past few years, there is a theory that with ChatGPT and its ilk doing a pretty fantastic job of cranking out copy. Why do you need expensive human resources? Once again, absolutely absurd and horrifying idea, but that narrative has taken root. And as an extension of that, neither journalists nor therapists have the requisite training or understanding of how to make these tech tools work as their allies. And truth be told, technology can be a fantastic ally to both therapists and journalists. Journalists, especially lonely journalists, lonely writers, creators like me, even, we can use AI as a surrogate editor, for instance, to look at our writing, give us feedback, help us tighten things. I find it very useful to use Perplexity, which is my AI tool of choice, as a kind of a machine editor. And sometimes it surprises me with its suggestions. Of course, I don't listen to everything it has to say because a lot of it is really bad, but I do take some of its suggestions seriously. Equally, therapists can use artificial intelligence tools to, let's say, parse through patient notes, identify patterns that can help them in streamlining their diagnosis or streamlining their line of treatment. Technology could also help them with a lot of administrative tasks that frankly reduce their efficiency, can tire them, can exhaust them, can help them with note taking, for instance. So technology can be an ally, but the average journalist, the average therapist at the moment have very little understanding of how to do that, and the environment around them is not really equipping them to make that journey either. What else do you have? I think another great similarity, which is again connected to the employment culture, the work culture in these professions, is the absolutely pathetic pay, especially if you are a youngster, you a young person entering these professions. You will not be able to afford even half a bag of peanuts sometimes with what you get paid. And there is this expectation that these professions exist for some kind of social good, and therefore they don't need to make money. They don't need to get paid as much as, I don't know, MBAs or engineers or what have you. So for young people in this profession, pay is a big problem. Um, Now, and again, as an extension to that, I think there is a lot of talk around just how important journalism and therapy, these things are for greater social good, because journalism, as it has been famously asserted, journalism is a defense in democracies. It helps uphold democratic values and principles. It keeps power in check. And therapy, of course, is supposed to be a way for our culture, society to heal itself, become better versions of ourselves, do the work that we need to do to undo defective patterns of behavior, develop better interpersonal skills, and which will hopefully, come together and help make the world a better place, to use a cliche. But in spite of this talk that journalism and therapy are super mega important, they lack any kind of social scaffolding when journalists are in crisis, when the media is in crisis, or when therapists are in crisis. There is very little organized support. There are very few shock absorbers that can help these professionals deal with those crises and emerge from them stronger, become more resilient. So that's another similarity. What else can you think of? Can you think of, whether you're a teacher or, I don't know, a cricketer or a musician or a banker or a lawyer or a construction worker or a mechanic, a cab driver? What do you think some of the similarities are between your profession and therapy? I think this could lead to a really meaningful conversation. Loneliness is an increasingly common feature of many professions, and I think this kind of conversation and free thinking can help us look at our own careers a little differently, and perhaps feel that we are not alone in the emotions that we experience, the challenges that we face, and maybe we can learn from each other, from careers that seemingly don't have anything in common. So there you have it. This Freethink Friday's question is: what does your career, what does your profession have in common with therapists? Send me your answers, drop them in the comments below, and the most fun answers will make their way to my newsletter, sanitybytonmoy.com. Check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already, for deep dives into mental health related topics, mental health related issues, and stories every week. And I will be back next Friday. My next edition of my newsletter will contain some of the most fun responses to this week's question, which is, what does your profession have in common with therapy? Until next Friday, take care and have a good weekend.